Hi everyone, Aaron Brooks with Perfect Postures, and wanted to talk about piriformis syndrome. Someone had suggested on the Facebook page you want to know more information about the piriformis syndrome. And great question, because to me, when people talk about syndromes and diagnosis, there's always something greater than the actual diagnosis or than, say, the piriformis syndrome. But just to give you a kind of little bit of a background on that, the piriformis muscle is where the sciatic nerve comes out through, and a lot of times, because of its attachment point, the piriformis attaches over to your sacrum and then crosses over and attaches over to your greater trochanter, that region there. And one of its functions is actually to help aid in rotation of the thigh bone, or hip rotation. So when people are diagnosed with that, I mean, that could be due to trauma where maybe someone's playing sports and they got kneed in the buttocks area and that created inflammation. Or in our case, most of the people that we see that have that type of symptom, it's been accumulating over time. So when it's diagnosed as piriformis syndrome, I look at that and say, okay, well, why is that getting irritated? And a lot of times with our evaluations, it has to do more with what the angle or position of your pelvis is doing, more so than the actual piriformis muscle itself. So common things that we see, probably the most prevalent is actually a rotation in the pelvis, and we move in 3 planes of motion. So we're talking about a rotation, that would be a transverse plane, and a lot of times we'll see a person rotating, and maybe we'll say it's right side, right piriformis syndrome. The pelvis may rotate right to left. Now what's interesting, and what most people don't look at, is when your pelvis rotates, you're actually changing the rotation of your right hip, because that's going to move into external rotation, and then the opposite side, that's going to actually move into internal rotation. So the importance of that is that when you start changing the pelvis, you're manipulating the hip, and then you're also manipulating what the attachment points are doing of that piriformis muscle. So that's one critical thing. Another thing may be that a person may have an elevation in their pelvis, and what that means is now we're talking more of what's called a frontal plane movement. So if there's an elevation, now what's happening, the hip on this side is going to actually go into a little bit of adduction, meaning the hip's going to actually angle in a little bit. Now, what that's going to do to that piriformis muscle is it's going to actually put it on tension. So it's actually going to lengthen a little bit. And because the sciatic nerve comes down through that area, because of the tension of the piriformis, that's going to put impingement on that nerve, and that could create irritation. Now, most people, the first thing they want to do with this condition is they want to stretch the piriformis. Well, that may have its place in certain situations, but more importantly, again, from what we do, is looking at the pelvic positions. So I hope that answers your question, and what we'll do is we'll actually show you a couple exercises, a little sequence that will actually address those 2 deviations that we talked about. So stay tuned for that, and we'll get on those corrective exercises.